long before most journeys through Johto ever begin, before trainers set foot on quiet routes or hear legends whispered in old towns, there is a story tied to fire, lightning, and rain. It is a story that the region itself seems to remember, not through direct explanation, but through ruins, atmosphere, and repetition. The burned tower stands as a physical reminder of something catastrophic that happened roughly 150 years before the events of the games, a disaster so severe that it reshaped Johto's mythology permanently. According to the commonly accepted account, the Western Tower once stood alongside its twin, tall and proud. One night, a lightning bolt struck the tower, igniting a fire so intense it burned for 3 days straight. The flames consumed the structure completely, and despite desperate efforts, nothing could be done to save it. Only after days of destruction did a sudden downpour arrive, finally extinguishing the blaze. By then, the tower was already gone, reduced to ash and memory. Inside that inferno, 3 unnamed Pokémon perished. They were not described in detail, only referred to as powerful creatures who were caught in the disaster and lost their lives within the burning tower. The story might have ended there, as a tragedy frozen in time. But this is Johto, a region where myth and reality often blur. From the sky descended Ho-Oh, a legendary figure tied to rebirth and renewal. Using its power, Ho-Oh resurrected the 3 fallen Pokémon, bringing them back to life in new forms. These reborn beings embodied the very forces that destroyed the tower. One represented the lightning that struck it, another the fire that consumed it, and the third the rain that ended the flames. However, their rebirth was not peaceful. When they appeared, their power was so overwhelming that it struck fear into anyone who witnessed them. Aware of their own strength, the 3 fled, running like the wind across the grasslands, scattering across Johto and beyond. From that moment on, they became roaming legends rather than stationary guardians. This is the widely accepted legend behind the 3 beasts, but for years, fans have asked a quieter question beneath it, not what they became, but what they were before the fire. One theory proposes that the 3 Pokémon who died in the tower were not random or forgotten creatures, but familiar ones in earlier forms. Specifically, it suggests that they were Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon. At first glance, this idea seems almost too neat, but the more closely it is examined, the more connections begin to surface. The most obvious connection lies in typing. The reborn trio each embody a single elemental force: fire, water, and electricity. Flareon aligns perfectly with fire, Vaporeon with water, and Jolteon with electricity. This alone does not prove anything, but it establishes a foundational symmetry. Johto's legends are rarely arbitrary, and elemental balance plays a significant role throughout the region's lore. Beyond typing, physical design offers another layer of connection. Both sets consist of 4-legged, mammalian creatures that resemble large cats or dogs. They share similar body proportions, stance, and movement style, while the legendary beasts appear larger, more angular, and more imposing. Their silhouettes are not entirely dissimilar from the evolutions when stripped of ornamentation and scale. Looking closer, specific visual similarities become harder to ignore. Flareon and Entei both emphasize thick fur, particularly around the neck and chest, giving them a heavy, powerful appearance. Jolteon and Raikou share sharp, angular features and spiked accents that convey speed and aggression. Vaporeon and Suicune both project a smoother, more fluid design, with an emphasis on elegance and bulk rather than raw attack. Stats add another intriguing parallel. Vaporeon and Suicune are both known for their bulk and defensive presence, capable of enduring long battles. Flareon and Entei lean toward physical strength, focusing on raw power rather than speed or special attacks. Jolteon and Raikou are fast and specialize in special attacks, built to strike quickly and decisively. These similarities are not exact mirrors, but the distribution patterns align closely enough to raise questions. The theory becomes even more compelling when considering geography and availability. In Johto's era, Eevee's elemental evolutions would have been far more common than later additions like Glaceon or Leafeon, which are tied to specific environmental conditions not prominently featured in the region. Fire, water, and electricity were the dominant elemental forces readily accessible in Johto's natural environment, making these three evolutions the most likely candidates to exist in the area at the time. If this theory holds, it paints a tragic picture. Three Pokemon that were once relatively ordinary, at least compared to what they would become, were caught in a disaster beyond their control. They died not as legends, but as creatures bound to the natural world. Their resurrection did not simply restore them, but transformed them into something far greater, something that no longer fit comfortably within the balance of everyday life. This transformation could explain why the three beasts fled upon revival. If they retained any memory or instinct from their former existence, the sudden amplification of their power might have been overwhelming. Running was not an act of aggression, but of self-preservation. They were no longer what they once were, and the world they returned to may have felt unfamiliar or dangerous. It also reframes Ho-Oh's role in the story. Rather than simply creating guardians, Ho-Oh may have been correcting a cosmic imbalance caused by tragedy. The resurrection was not meant to create rulers or conquerors, but living embodiments of the forces that shaped the disaster itself. Fire, lightning, and rain were no longer destructive elements alone. They were given form and consciousness. The terror witnessed by those who saw their rise might not have come from malice, but from awe. Power without context is frightening, especially when it emerges suddenly from ruin. In Johto, fear and reverence often coexist, and legends are rarely painted as purely benevolent or malevolent. Another layer of this theory lies in motion. The legendary beasts are known for roaming endlessly, never settling in one place. This behavior aligns with creatures who do not fully belong anywhere. If they were once Pokemon that evolved naturally and lived alongside humans, their rebirth as roaming forces could represent a loss of that connection. They are alive, but displaced. The idea also adds weight to their encounters. When a trainer finally meets one of these beasts, it is not just a test of strength. It is an intersection between past and present, between what was lost and what was created in its place. The chase itself mirrors their original flight, reinforcing the idea that they are still running, even generations later. Critics of the theory point out that there is no explicit confirmation within the games or official materials. The legend never names the Pokemon that died, and the evolutions are never directly tied to the event. This absence of confirmation is important, but it does not necessarily invalidate the idea. Johto's storytelling relies heavily on implication rather than exposition. Many of its deepest ideas are left intentionally open-ended. In fact, the lack of confirmation may strengthen the theory's thematic fit. Johto is a region defined by history that is remembered imperfectly. Ruins are broken, towers are burned, stories are passed down incomplete. The truth, if it exists, is fragmented. In that context, an unnamed trio becoming legendary beasts fits naturally. Whether or not Flareon, Vaporeon, and Jolteon were truly the ones who perished in the tower, the theory highlights something important about Johto's design philosophy. Power is not always earned. Sometimes it is inherited through loss. Sometimes legends are born not from triumph, but from tragedy. This interpretation also adds a subtle melancholy to the presence of the legendary beasts. They are powerful, revered, and feared, yet fundamentally restless. They do not rule territories or guard temples. They wander. Their strength is immense, but their purpose remains undefined. Perhaps that is the quiet lesson embedded in the legend, that rebirth does not erase the past, and transformation does not guarantee peace. Fire, lightning, and rain reshaped the tower, and in doing so, reshaped 3 lives forever. In Johto, even the strongest forces carry echoes of what they once were, running endlessly through the grasslands, caught between memory and myth. Among all Pokemon theories that bridge deep time with modern technology, few are as unsettling as the idea that Genesect is not an entirely new creation, but a rewritten version of something ancient. This theory suggests that Genesect is a heavily modified descendant of Kabutops, altered by Team Plasma hundreds of millions of years after its original era. Unlike theories rooted purely in symbolism or visual coincidence, this one is grounded in timelines, dex entries, and an uncomfortable overlap between extinction and resurrection. The core of the theory begins with time. Kabuto and its evolved form are repeatedly described as Pokemon that thrived roughly 300 million years ago. This is not a vague long ago, but a specific, recurring number that appears across multiple Pokédex entries. Kabuto's Ultra Sun entry states that it lived 300 million years in the past, and hints that living specimens might still exist in rare regions. This already places Kabutops in a strange position within Pokemon history, extinct, yet possibly lingering. Genesect's own Pokédex entries use the same time frame. In Pokemon Black, it is described as having existed over 300 million years ago and being feared as the strongest of hunters. The wording is deliberate. Genesect is not said to be newly created, only modified. Team Plasma did not invent it. They found something ancient and changed it. That shared time frame is the foundation of the theory. 2 Pokemon, both described as apex predators, both tied to the same distant era, both referenced with the same numerical age. In a franchise where numbers are rarely reused accidentally, this overlap immediately raises questions. Physical structure strengthens the connection. Kabutops is a bipedal, bladed creature built for predation. Its scythe-like arms are its defining feature, clearly designed for cutting and hunting. Genesect shares this same silhouette: upright posture, narrow torso, and sharp bladed forearms. Even after extreme modification, its core shape remains similar. The posture of a hunter does not change easily, even across eras. Supporters of the theory argue that Genesect looks less like a natural organism and more like a reinforced version of something that already existed. The armor plating, cannon, and metallic exterior do not obscure its original anatomy completely. Instead, they seem built around it, as though Team Plasma preserved the body plan while enhancing its lethality. The idea of Kabutops as an apex predator fits this narrative perfectly. In ancient seas, Kabutops is often portrayed as a dominant hunter, slicing through prey with ease. Its design suggests speed, aggression, and efficiency. Translating that role into a futuristic context would naturally result in something like Genesect, a predator optimized not for oceans, but for modern combat. The drastic change in typing is often cited as the strongest argument against the theory. Kabutops is associated with water and rock, while Genesect is associated with bug and steel. On the surface, this seems like an impossible leap. However, supporters counter that typing in Pokemon is not purely biological. It often reflects function, environment, and modification. If Team Plasma stripped Kabutops of its aquatic nature and refitted it for terrestrial dominance, the water aspect could be lost entirely. Steel typing would naturally emerge from extensive mechanical augmentation. Bug typing, meanwhile, may reflect how the creature is categorized after modification rather than its original nature. In other words, Genesect's typing may describe what it has become, not what it once was. Habitat differences are also addressed within the theory. Kabutops lived in ancient seas, while Genesect operates on land, but this transition is not implausible when viewed through artificial intervention. Removing gills, reinforcing limbs, and adapting the body for land movement would fundamentally alter how the creature exists. Team Plasma's involvement explains the environmental shift. The cannon mounted on Genesect's back adds another layer to the theory. This weapon is often interpreted as a modern enhancement, but its placement and integration suggest it was designed to complement an existing hunting style rather than replace it. Genesect still fights at close range, using its blades. The cannon enhances its lethality rather than redefining it. Thematically, the theory aligns disturbingly well with Team Plasma's ideology. Team Plasma is obsessed with control, power, and rewriting the natural order under the guise of liberation. Taking an ancient predator and forcing it into a new form fits their narrative perfectly. It is domination disguised as progress. There is also a darker implication. Kabutops is associated with extinction. It represents a species that could not survive environmental change. Genesect, by contrast, represents survival through modification. If the theory is true, Genesect is not a triumph, but a refusal to let something die naturally. It is preservation without consent. This interpretation reframes Genesect's existence as tragic rather than impressive. It is not a reborn legend like the beasts of Johto, restored by a higher power. It is a relic dragged forward into an era where it does not belong, altered to serve someone else's vision. The loneliness often associated with Genesect in its portrayal supports this reading. It is not shown as a leader or a guardian. It is a weapon. Its design emphasizes isolation, with no visible signs of community or natural behavior. This isolation contrasts sharply with how ancient Pokémon are usually depicted as part of ecosystems. Some fans also point to Kabuto's Ultra Sun entry, hinting that living specimens might still exist. If a living Kabutops were discovered in modern times, it would be an extraordinary find. Team Plasma, acquiring such a specimen and deciding to modify it rather than study it peacefully, fits their established behavior. Opponents of the theory argue that the similarities are coincidental, that shared timelines do not imply shared identity. They also point out that Pokémon evolution and classification are flexible, and many species share traits without being related. These are valid criticisms, and the theory remains unconfirmed. However, Pokémon lore has a long history of leaving uncomfortable questions unanswered. Mewtwo's origin, the ethics of fossil revival, and the consequences of forced evolution all sit in moral gray areas. The Genesect Kabutops theory fits neatly into this tradition. If true, it also adds a chilling subtext to the idea of fossil Pokémon. Reviving ancient species is often framed as harmless curiosity. This theory suggests a darker alternative, that some revivals may not end in peaceful coexistence, but in exploitation. It also reframes Genesec's power. Its fearsome reputation is no longer just about strength, but about history. It carries the instincts of an ancient hunter combined with the enhancements of modern technology. That fusion makes it uniquely dangerous, the repeated emphasis on feared as the strongest of hunters across both Pokédex entries becomes less coincidental in this light. It reads not as a reused phrase, but as a quiet acknowledgement that these two descriptions are connected. Whether or not Kabutops truly became Genesect, the theory highlights a recurring theme in Pokemon that not all progress is benevolent. Some advancements come at the cost of identity, autonomy, and belonging. In this interpretation, Genesect is not a miracle of science. It is a warning, a reminder that dragging the past into the present and reshaping it to fit modern ideals can create something powerful but profoundly wrong. And if Kabutops truly lies beneath that metal shell, then Genesect is not just a mythical Pokemon. It is an ancient survivor, still hunting long after its world has ended. For most viewers, Team Rocket exists as one of Pokemon's clearest symbols of villainy. They steal Pokemon, exploit others for profit, and repeatedly interfere with the journeys of young trainers. Their leaders command criminal organizations. Their grunts lurk in dark tunnels, and their schemes almost always end with someone being hurt or manipulated. On the surface, there seems to be little ambiguity. Team Rocket are the bad guys, and the heroes stand in opposition to them. And yet, for years, fans have returned to one specific detail that refuses to sit quietly in the background, a detail spoken casually, repeatedly, almost playfully. Team Rocket's motto: to protect the world from devastation, to unite all peoples within our nation. In the English version of the anime, this speech is treated as a joke. Jesse and James strike dramatic poses. Meowth chimes in, and the entire routine is framed as theatrical nonsense. It is easy to dismiss it as irony, a villain claiming noble intentions, while clearly doing the opposite. But when fans looked closer, especially at the original Japanese version, the wording felt different. The Japanese motto translates more closely to prevent the destruction of the world, to protect the peace of the world. These are not the words of cartoon criminals chasing petty theft. These are the words of people who believe, or claim to believe, that something far worse exists beyond what the audience is being shown. That single discrepancy opened the door to one of Pokemon's most enduring and unsettling theories. What if Team Rocket, at least in some form, believes they are saving the world? To understand why this idea gained traction, it helps to look at how Team Rocket is portrayed across different layers of Pokemon media. In the games, they are unquestionably criminal. They traffic Pokemon, exploit labor, and attempt to weaponize powerful creatures for profit and control. Giovanni, their leader, is ruthless, calculating, and unapologetic. There is no heroic framing in his actions. But the anime presents something slightly different. Jesse and James are not masterminds. They are persistent, dramatic, and often incompetent. Their plans fail not because they lack conviction, but because they are constantly opposed by forces far stronger than themselves. Despite this, they never quit. They never abandon their mission, and they never stop repeating their motto. What makes this interesting is not what they do, but how they justify it. They do not say they want wealth. They do not say they want power. They do not even say they want revenge. They say they are protecting the world. One interpretation is that this is simply delusion. Villains often justify their actions with grand rhetoric to mask selfish motives. But Team Rocket's consistency complicates that reading. They repeat this belief even when no one is listening, even when it gains them nothing, even when they are humiliated, defeated, or blasted away. If it were purely performative, it would fade. Instead, it persists. This persistence led fans to question whether Team Rocket knows something the heroes do not. Throughout the Pokemon world, there are hints of forces that exist far beyond human control. Legendary Pokemon are capable of reshaping land, sea, time, and reality itself. Ancient myths speak of disasters narrowly avoided, towers burned, civilizations erased. The balance of the world often seems far more fragile than the bright tone of the anime suggests. From this perspective, Team Rocket's obsession with capturing powerful Pokemon could be interpreted not as greed, but as containment. If these beings are truly capable of ending the world, then leaving them unmonitored might be the greatest threat of all. A centralized organization that tracks, captures, and controls them could, in theory, be acting as a stabilizing force. This interpretation becomes more compelling when examining Giovanni's behavior. Giovanni is not portrayed as reckless. He is strategic. He rarely acts emotionally. He chooses targets carefully. His interest is often directed toward rare or uniquely powerful Pokemon rather than common ones. This selectivity suggests intention rather than chaos. Giovanni also steps away from leadership when defeated, not in a dramatic attempt to reclaim power, but in silence. He does not seek revenge. He does not double down publicly. He disappears. This restraint is unusual for a typical villain and has led some fans to speculate that his goals may not be fully aligned with simple domination. The theory becomes even more intriguing when viewed through the lens of early Pokemon storytelling, which was notably more morally rigid than later generations. Good was good, evil was evil. Gray areas were rare. If the creators had any intention of planting a morally complex faction early on, subtlety would have been the only viable option. Team Rocket's motto could be interpreted as that subtlety. Another angle of the theory focuses on Jesse and James specifically. Unlike Giovanni, they are deeply emotional characters. They form attachments to their Pokemon. They grieve when separated from them. They often show genuine care, even tenderness, beneath their bluster. This emotional capacity seems at odds with pure villainy. They also never attempt to seriously harm Ash or his friends. Despite countless encounters, they rarely escalate beyond capture attempts. There are no lethal strategies, no irreversible harm. Their conflict is cyclical rather than destructive. Some fans argue that Jesse and James function less like criminals and more like watchdogs. They follow Ash relentlessly, not because he is weak, but because he repeatedly crosses paths with legendary and potentially catastrophic forces. Wherever Ash goes, disaster often follows. From ancient temples to powerful beings awakening, Ash is consistently at the center of events that could destabilize the world. Under this interpretation, Team Rocket's presence becomes less antagonistic and more preventative. They are always there, always watching, always intervening. Even when they fail, they delay events, disrupt momentum, and create space for outcomes that are less catastrophic than they might otherwise be. This reading casts their constant failure in a new light. They are not meant to succeed outright. They are meant to interfere just enough. The idea that Team Rocket is opposing a greater unseen threat also aligns with broader Pokemon themes introduced later in the franchise. Many later villain teams believe they are acting for the greater good, even when their methods are extreme. While Team Rocket predates this narrative complexity, it is not unreasonable to imagine early seeds of it planted unintentionally. However, there are strong arguments against this theory. Team Rocket undeniably harms innocent people. They steal, they exploit, they endanger ecosystems. In the games especially, their actions are unambiguously destructive. There is no indication that civilians are safer because of their presence. If they are protecting the world, they are doing a remarkably poor job of minimizing collateral damage. Additionally, their motto could simply be propaganda. Organizations often frame their goals in noble language, regardless of reality. The disconnect between words and actions may be the point rather than the clue. There is also the issue of tone. Pokemon's early narrative framework was not built for deep moral ambiguity. The anime, in particular, leaned heavily into clear-cut lessons suitable for children. A secret villains were right all along reveal would have clashed sharply with that structure. Even so, the persistence of this theory speaks to something real within the text. Team Rocket occupies an unusual narrative space. They are ever present, yet never decisive, threatening, yet familiar, dangerous, yet oddly comforting. Their failure is expected, but their absence would feel wrong. This paradox is what allows the theory to survive. In many ways, Team Rocket functions as a pressure valve within the story. They introduce conflict without permanent consequences. They absorb tension that might otherwise escalate. By failing repeatedly, they prevent the world from changing too drastically. Whether intentional or not, this role aligns strangely well with the idea of preventing devastation. There is also something telling about how Team Rocket never truly wins, but the world also never truly collapses. Catastrophes are narrowly avoided again and again. Balance is restored. Life goes on. Someone is always there to interfere when things get too dangerous. Maybe Team Rocket is not the hero, but maybe they are not the true enemy either. Perhaps they represent a flawed, misguided attempt at control in a world where power constantly threatens to spiral beyond comprehension. They are not saviors. They are not monsters. They are people who believe, wrongly or rightly, that the world needs someone willing to get their hands dirty. In the end, the theory does not ask us to forgive Team Rocket. It asks us to reconsider them. What if their motto was not irony, but confession? What if, in a world filled with gods, disasters, and forces beyond understanding, Team Rocket genuinely believed that someone had to stand between humanity and devastation? And what if they were willing to be hated for it? Even if the theory is untrue, it reveals something fascinating about Pokemon's world, that beneath its bright surface lies a setting capable of supporting darker interpretations. A world where even the villains might believe they are protecting something fragile. And perhaps that fragility is exactly why the theory refuses to disappear. Evolution is often presented as one of the most positive forces in the Pokemon world. It represents growth, strength, and progress. A Pokemon trains, overcomes challenges, and transforms into something more powerful. In the games, evolution is celebrated with music, light, and a sense of achievement. It is framed as a reward for effort and bonding, but the anime quietly complicates this idea. During Ash's early journey through Kanto, he acquires all 3 starter Pokemon. One of them evolves rapidly, moving through multiple forms and becoming dramatically stronger. The other 2 do not. More than that, they actively resist the idea of changing. This resistance is not subtle. It is emotional, deliberate, and, in one case, the central conflict of an entire episode. This difference sparked a long-running theory among fans. What if evolution is not universally desired? What if some Pokemon actively fear it? The theory suggests that Bulbasaur and Squirtle did not refuse evolution because they wanted to stay cute or because the story needed recognizable mascots. Instead, they refused because they were afraid of what evolution would do to them, not physically, but psychologically. To understand why this theory resonates, it helps to look closely at what happens when Charmander evolves. Early on, Charmander is loyal, gentle, and emotionally dependent on Ash. He trusts him completely, even to the point of endangering himself. That trust is rewarded with care and patience, and their bond feels genuine. Charmander's evolution into Charmeleon is initially framed as a triumph. He becomes stronger. He survives difficult battles. He looks more intimidating. But almost immediately, something changes. Charmeleon begins to disobey Ash. He ignores commands, refuses to fight seriously, and even actively endangers his trainer. Later, after evolving again, this behavior intensifies. The personality shift is stark. The Pokémon that once depended on Ash now views him as unworthy. From a narrative standpoint, this disobedience serves as a lesson about responsibility and strength. But from an in-universe perspective, it raises a troubling question. Did evolution change Charmander's personality? If so, was that change temporary, or was it an inherent part of the process? This question becomes far more unsettling when placed next to Bulbasaur's story. In the episode centered around its refusal to evolve, Bulbasaur is surrounded by others of its kind who see evolution as a rite of passage. They encourage it, pressure it, treat resistance as weakness. Bulbasaur, however, stands firm. It does not say it cannot evolve. It says it does not want to. The episode frames this choice as valid. Bulbasaur is not punished or portrayed as wrong. It proves its strength without changing form, earning the respect of the others. On the surface, this is a message about self-acceptance, but beneath that message lies something darker. Bulbasaur has seen what evolution can do. Fans point to Episode 17, Island of the Giant Pokémon, as a crucial piece of evidence. In this episode, Pokémon are shown communicating among themselves, with subtitles revealing their conversations. Charmander, Squirtle, and Bulbasaur are depicted as close friends, relying on each other during a crisis. This shared experience establishes a bond independent of their trainer. Shortly after this episode, Charmander evolves. From that point on, the dynamic changes. Charmander's personality shifts dramatically, and the friendship established earlier is never quite the same. Squirtle and Bulbasaur witness this change firsthand. They see their friend become stronger, but also colder, more aggressive, and less compassionate. The theory suggests that this observation is what instills fear. If evolution can fundamentally alter who you are, not just how strong you are, then choosing to evolve becomes a far more complex decision. Strength may come at the cost of identity. Power may demand sacrifice. Squirtle's case is quieter, but equally telling. Squirtle is a leader, commanding a group and enforcing a strict code. It values structure, loyalty, and control. Evolution, especially into a larger, heavier form, might disrupt that identity. Remaining as it is allows Squirtle to retain the role it understands. Unlike Bulbasaur, Squirtle does not openly confront the issue. It simply avoids it. This avoidance can be interpreted as quiet fear rather than indifference. The anime never explicitly states that evolution changes personality, but it shows it often enough to make the pattern noticeable. Multiple evolved Pokémon are portrayed as more aggressive, more independent, or more difficult to control. While some later regain balance, the transition period is almost always turbulent. This raises an unsettling possibility. What if evolution temporarily destabilizes a Pokemon's sense of self? If evolution floods a Pokemon with new instincts, increased strength, and altered physical capabilities, it could easily overwhelm its existing personality. For some, this instability may be worth enduring. For others, it may feel like losing control. From this perspective, Bulbasaur's refusal is not stubbornness, it is caution. The theory also reframes evolution stones and forced evolution in a darker light. If a Pokemon is evolved without consent, what happens to its sense of agency? Is it still the same individual, or is something lost in the transition? The games often avoid this question, but the anime brushes against it repeatedly. Pokemon that evolve against their will are frequently shown struggling emotionally or acting unpredictably. The narrative usually resolves this by restoring harmony, but the discomfort remains. This fear-based interpretation of evolution adds depth to Pokemon relationships. It suggests that trust between trainer and Pokemon must extend beyond battles. A trainer must be trusted not just to command, but to decide when change is appropriate. Ash's journey reflects this learning curve. He initially celebrates evolution without considering its emotional cost. Over time, he becomes more attentive, more willing to listen, and less eager to force change. His bond with Bulbasaur and Squirtle deepens precisely because he respects their choices. The theory also aligns with broader Pokemon themes about individuality. Not every Pokemon needs to reach a final form to be complete. Strength is contextual. Identity matters. From a darker angle, the theory implies that the Pokemon world quietly accepts a truth it rarely discusses, that progress is not universally good, that becoming stronger can mean becoming something you do not recognize. This interpretation also casts the Pokemon League system in a harsher light. If evolution is often tied to competitive pressure, then some Pokemon may feel forced to change simply to survive within that structure. Those who resist may be seen as weaker, even if they are content. Bulbasaur's stand becomes quietly revolutionary. It chooses selfhood over expectation. It refuses to sacrifice identity for approval. The theory does not claim that evolution is evil. It suggests that evolution is risky, that it carries emotional consequences that not every Pokemon is willing to accept. This idea resonates because it mirrors real-world fears about change. Growing stronger often means growing different. Not everyone wants that difference, even if it comes with benefits. Whether or not the creators intended this reading, the anime leaves enough space for it to exist. By showing evolution as both empowering and destabilizing, it allows viewers to question the cost of transformation. In the end, the theory reframes Bulbasaur and Squirtle not as stagnant, but as self-aware. They are not afraid of weakness. They are afraid of losing themselves. And in a world where evolution is often celebrated without hesitation, that fear feels unexpectedly human. Among all the emotional moments in the Pokemon anime, few have lingered as strongly or as strangely as the farewell between Ash and Butterfree. On the surface, it is a gentle, bittersweet episode about letting go, framed as a necessary act of love. Butterfree leaves to join others of its kind, following an instinct older than training or loyalty. Ash cries, the music swells, and the journey continues. But for years, a much darker interpretation circulated among fans, one that refused to disappear despite being officially untrue. The theory claimed that in the original Japanese version of the anime, Butterfree did not simply leave, it died. According to the rumor, Butterfree's departure was not about freedom or migration, but about the natural life cycle of insects. After mating, Butterfree was said to perish, mirroring the real-world fate of certain species. Ash's tears, in this interpretation, were not those of separation, but of final loss. He was not releasing a companion. He was saying goodbye forever. This idea was never confirmed. In fact, it was directly false. And yet, it spread rapidly, persisting through playground conversations, early internet forums, and whispered explanations passed between fans. To understand why, it helps to look not just at the episode itself, but at the cultural moment in which the rumor took root. The episode, Bye Bye Butterfree, is already unusually somber for early Pokémon. There is no villain, no battle, no lesson about strategy or growth. Instead, the conflict is emotional. Ash must choose between his desire to keep Butterfree and Butterfree's need to follow its instincts. The tone is quiet. The pacing is slow. The ending lingers for many young viewers. This was their first experience of loss within the Pokémon world. Not loss through defeat, but loss through choice. Butterfree leaves, not because it is taken, but because staying would be wrong. This emotional framing created fertile ground for reinterpretation. At the time, there was a widespread belief that Japanese media was significantly darker than its Western adaptations. Anime censorship was a common topic, especially in the early 2000s. Fans knew that scenes were edited, dialogue altered, and entire concepts softened for international audiences. This context made the idea of a hidden, darker version of Pokémon feel plausible. The rumor expanded quickly. If Butterfree died in the Japanese version, then what else was changed? Fans began to speculate that Pokémon bled in the original anime, that battles were more violent, and that characters who disappeared were actually killed off. The idea of two parallel Pokémon animes took shape, a sanitized Western version and a grim Japanese original. Butterfree became the centerpiece of this imagined divide. The logic behind the theory drew from biology. Insects often have short lifespans. Many die shortly after reproduction. Butterfree, being insect-like, could reasonably follow a similar pattern. The episode's focus on mating, migration, and farewell seemed to align with this idea too closely to be coincidence. Ash's reaction also fueled the belief. He cries openly, more intensely, than in many other episodes. He does not promise to see Butterfree again. He does not frame the goodbye as temporary. The camera lingers on his face as the Pokémon disappears into the sky. For children watching at the time, this felt final. The theory also benefited from absence. Butterfree never returns. Other Pokémon released by Ash are often revisited or referenced. Butterfree is not. This absence reinforced the idea that the story was closed, that there was nothing more to say. Over time, the rumor evolved into something larger than Butterfree itself. It became a symbol of a darker Pokémon world that viewers were never meant to see, a world where death existed openly, where battles had consequences, where innocence was a surface-level illusion. The appeal of this imagined world was not purely morbid. It offered validation. For fans who felt deeply affected by the episode, the idea that Butterfree had died made their emotional response feel justified. The sadness was not exaggerated, it was appropriate. In this sense, the theory functioned as emotional confirmation rather than factual speculation. As fans grew older, the rumor became a kind of cultural artifact. Even those who knew it was false often repeated it, not as truth, but as legend. It was a story about Pokémon itself, passed down through the fandom, much like in-universe myths are passed down through regions. This meta layer is part of what makes the theory fascinating. It mirrors Pokemon's own storytelling structure. Legends, rumors, and half-truths shape how people understand the world. Butterfree's death became one such legend, shaping how fans remembered the anime. The idea of two Pokemon worlds also reflected a broader shift in audience perception. As fans aged, many began to reinterpret Pokemon through a darker lens. Childhood innocence gave way to adult curiosity about consequences, ethics, and mortality. The theory fit neatly into that transition. It also highlighted something real about Pokemon's storytelling limits. Death does exist in the Pokemon world, but it is rarely shown directly. It is implied, softened, or displaced into myth. Butterfree's goodbye sits at the edge of that boundary, where loss is felt but not named. This ambiguity is likely intentional. Pokemon has always balanced emotional weight carefully, especially in its earlier years. By allowing viewers to feel loss without explicitly framing it as death, the show made the moment accessible to children while still meaningful to older audiences. The rumor filled in the gap left by that ambiguity. Interestingly, the theory also changed how fans viewed Ash. If Butterfree died, then Ash experienced true grief early in his journey. This would explain his later maturity, his empathy, and his willingness to let go. It reframes his character arc as one shaped by loss rather than perpetual optimism. Even without being true, the theory offered narrative cohesion. As the internet matured and information became more accessible, the rumor was debunked repeatedly. Official translations were examined. Japanese scripts were shared. The truth became clear. Butterfree did not die. And yet, the theory never fully disappeared. This persistence reveals something important about Pokemon's relationship with its audience. Fans are not just passive consumers. They actively reinterpret, mythologize, and expand the world to reflect their own emotional experiences. Butterfree's imagined death was not about shock value. It was about acknowledging that saying goodbye can feel as final as death, especially to a child. In that sense, the theory was emotionally true, even if it was factually false. The idea of two Pokemon animes also speaks to generational divides. Younger fans accepted the story as it was. Older fans, reflecting back, sensed something heavier beneath the surface. The theory bridged that gap, offering a shared language for discussing loss within a franchise known for optimism. It also demonstrated how rumors can become communal storytelling. The Butterfree theory was not created by a single person. It emerged collectively, shaped by repetition and belief rather than evidence. In many ways, it functions like an urban legend. It survives not because it is true, but because it feels right. The Pokemon world is often described as safe, but moments like Butterfree's farewell suggest otherwise. They hint at a world where attachment has consequences and where letting go is sometimes necessary. The theory simply took that hint and followed it to its darkest conclusion. Whether Butterfree died or not, the emotional impact of that goodbye remains unchanged. Ash lost a companion, a chapter closed. The journey continued, but something was left behind. Perhaps that is why the theory continues to resonate. It captures a feeling that the episode itself evokes but never names. The feeling that sometimes, in Pokemon as in life, goodbye really does mean goodbye. And maybe that is all the theory ever needed to be. From the earliest episodes of the Pokemon anime, one detail quietly unsettled attentive viewers, even if they couldn't quite articulate why. No matter where Ash traveled, no matter how distant or isolated the town, two figures were always waiting. One stood behind the counter of the Pokemon Center, calm and reassuring. The other patrolled the streets, confident and authoritative. They looked the same, they sounded the same, they acted the same. Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny. At first, this repetition felt harmless, even comforting. Pokemon was a world built on consistency. Familiar faces meant safety. But as the series went on, the question became impossible to ignore. Why were they identical? Not similar, identical. This question grew louder as the franchise expanded. Regions changed, cultures shifted, legends varied wildly from place to place. And yet, every Pokemon Center housed the same gentle nurse, and every police station employed the same officer. The anime occasionally waved this away with jokes or surface-level explanations, but for years there was no concrete answer. Into that silence stepped one of Pokemon's most enduring dark theories. Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny are the products of a failed cloning project. The theory did not emerge randomly. It was born at the intersection of repetition, early anime mystery, and one very important story beat that arrived in 1998 with the release of Pokémon, the first movie. That film fundamentally changed how fans understood what Pokémon storytelling was capable of. Until then, Pokémon had largely avoided explicit science fiction horror, but Mewtwo Strikes Back shattered that boundary. It introduced cloning, genetic manipulation, ethical collapse, and grief-driven obsession. It showed that humans in the Pokémon world were capable of terrifying things, especially when driven by loss and ambition. At the center of that story was Dr. Fuji. Dr. Fuji was not portrayed as a cackling villain. He was a broken man, a scientist consumed by grief after the death of his daughter, Amber. His goal was not domination, at least not initially. He wanted to undo death. He wanted to bring someone back. Cloning was his answer. Under Giovanni's funding and pressure, that answer became something else entirely. Fuji's work led not only to the recreation of Amber, but to the creation of Mewtwo, a being whose existence was defined by suffering, identity crisis, and rage. The movie framed cloning as unnatural, unstable, and ethically catastrophic. For fans, this revelation recontextualized the entire Pokémon world. If cloning existed here, and if it had already gone so wrong once, what else might be hidden beneath the surface? That question circled back to Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny. The theory proposes that long before Mewtwo, Dr. Fuji experimented with human cloning in a more controlled, less ambitious way. Instead of trying to resurrect the dead or create a weapon, he attempted to duplicate living humans. The goal was not immortality or power, but perfection through replication. Under this interpretation, Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny were prototypes. They were not meant to be weapons. They were meant to be helpers, caretakers, peacekeepers, figures of trust and stability who could be placed anywhere and function reliably. If cloning could produce consistent, well-adjusted individuals capable of performing essential social roles, then the technology would be viable. In this reading, the Pokemon centers and police stations of the world become test environments. Each clone operates independently, interacting with different trainers, Pokemon, and communities. Their behavior, adaptability, and emotional responses are observed indirectly through the world itself. The theory suggests that Dr. Fuji allowed them to live freely rather than confining them to a lab, believing that real-world conditions would provide the most honest data. How do clones respond to stress, to danger, to responsibility, to routine? The unsettling implication is that the Pokemon world itself became part of the experiment. Supporters of the theory often point to the specific roles Joy and Jenny occupy. They are positions of service, not authority over the global order. They heal, assist, protect, and guide. These are ideal functions for early cloning trials because failure would be subtle rather than catastrophic. A malfunctioning caretaker raises fewer alarms than a malfunctioning ruler. There is also the emotional neutrality of these characters to consider. Nurse Joy is endlessly patient, endlessly kind, and rarely shows strong emotional deviation. Officer Jenny is consistently confident, composed, and decisive. Both exhibit stable, predictable behavior across regions. From a narrative standpoint, this consistency is practical. From a theoretical standpoint, it looks engineered. The theory gains further traction when fans examine how little personal history these characters seem to have. Unlike recurring characters who receive backstories, motivations, or growth arcs, Joy and Jenny exist almost entirely in the present tense. They are defined by function rather than identity. Who are they outside of their roles? The anime rarely answers that question. The cloning theory argues that this absence is not accidental. It suggests that Joy and Jenny were never meant to develop distinct identities. Individuality was not the goal. Reliability was. Under this lens, the differences occasionally shown between versions of Joy or Jenny are not contradictions, but variations within acceptable parameters. Minor personality shifts, regional accents, or preferences could represent environmental influence rather than genetic divergence. In other words, the clones are not perfectly identical, they are controlled. The connection to Mewtwo becomes particularly disturbing here. If Joy and Jenny were early experiments, then Mewtwo represents what happens when cloning moves beyond control, when the subject gains awareness, when it questions its purpose, when it rejects being an experiment. Mewtwo's suffering becomes the culmination of everything that went wrong with cloning. In that context, the cheerful, unassuming presence of Joy and Jenny takes on a chilling undertone. They are what cloning looks like when it works. Mewtwo is what happens when it doesn't. This framing also reframes Giovanni's involvement. Giovanni funded Dr. Fuji's work not out of curiosity, but ambition. If cloning could produce obedient, functional humans, then cloning Pokemon for power would be the logical next step. Control precedes conquest. The theory suggests that when Fuji realized where this path was leading, he withdrew. He abandoned the project. Joy and Jenny were left behind, scattered across the world, continuing their roles without ever knowing why they existed. It is important to note that the anime eventually addressed the Joy and Jenny mystery directly, revealing that they are separate individuals from the same family, often cousins. This explanation effectively debunks the cloning theory on a canonical level, but debunking does not erase resonance. Fans continue to return to the theory because it fits emotionally, if not factually. It aligns with the darker undercurrents introduced by Mewtwo's story. It explains an uncanny repetition that the official explanation resolves mechanically rather than thematically. It also adds a layer of science fiction horror that feels strangely appropriate for early Pokemon, a series that frequently flirts with existential ideas without fully committing to them. There is also a meta-narrative aspect to consider. Joy and Jenny originated as sprite reuse in the games. Limited memory and hardware constraints made repetition unavoidable. The anime inherited this design choice and retrofitted it into the world. The cloning theory is, in part, a fan attempt to reconcile production limitations with in-universe logic. It transforms a technical shortcut into narrative depth. That transformation is part of why Pokemon theories persist. They are not always about truth, they are about meaning. Even knowing the theory is false, imagining it changes how the world feels. Pokemon centers become eerily uniform, police stations feel staged. The comforting repetition takes on an uncanny edge. It raises questions Pokemon rarely asks, directly. How much individuality exists in a world built on roles? What happens when stability comes at the cost of identity? Is a peaceful world worth maintaining if it relies on unseen sacrifice? These are not questions Pokemon intends to answer, but the fact that the world can support them speaks to its depth. The Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny cloning theory endures because it reframes familiar comfort as quiet horror. It suggests that beneath the bright surface of the Pokemon world lies a history of experimentation, loss, and ethical compromise. And even if that history never truly happened, the shadow it casts is enough to make the theory linger, because sometimes the most unsettling stories are the ones that almost make sense. From the very first moments of the Pokemon anime, Pikachu is framed as different, not rare in the way legendary Pokemon are rare, not unusual in appearance, but different in temperament, power, and presence. This difference is never fully explained in the early years of the series, and that absence gave rise to one of the longest-running and most quietly persistent fan theories, that Pikachu had a trainer before Ash ever entered Professor Oak's lab. The theory does not begin with power scaling or battle feats. It begins with behavior. When Ash first meets Pikachu, the Pokemon is openly hostile. It refuses to listen, refuses to cooperate, and reacts aggressively to attempts at control. This is not unusual for wild Pokemon, but Pikachu is not introduced as wild. It is introduced as a Pokemon already in human care, housed in a lab, assigned to a trainer, and transported in a Pokeball. Yet it behaves less like a newly caught Pokemon and more like one that has already learned to distrust humans. Professor Oak himself reinforces this discomfort. He does not present Pikachu with the same ceremony as the other starters. In fact, he seems reluctant. He refers to Pikachu as difficult and not like the others, suggesting prior knowledge that goes beyond simple temperament. He waits until Ash complains that all the other Pokemon are gone before offering Pikachu, as though it is not the intended choice. This hesitation is important. Oak is not careless. He is not impulsive. If he knows Pikachu is problematic, why keep it in the lab at all? Why assign it to a brand new trainer with no experience? The theory suggests that Oak is not making a random decision, but passing along a Pokemon with history. One of the most frequently cited pieces of visual evidence is Pikachu's Pokeball. Unlike every other standard ball shown in that episode, Pikachu's has a lightning bolt symbol painted above the central button. This marking is never explained in early episodes, and no other starter ball features a similar design. Fans interpreted this as personalization, a mark placed by a previous owner. In a franchise where visual details are usually deliberate, that single symbol felt significant. Why would a standard lab Pokeball be customized? Why only Pikachu's? And why never explain it? Supporters of the theory argued that Pikachu had already been trained, possibly by another young trainer who failed, abandoned the journey, or lost Pikachu under unknown circumstances. Oak, aware of Pikachu's power and volatility, may have taken it in temporarily, waiting for someone capable of earning its trust again. This interpretation casts Pikachu's early disobedience in a new light. Instead of being inexperienced or wild, Pikachu may be cautious. It may have learned that trainers leave, fail, or mistreat Pokemon. Its refusal to obey Ash is not defiance, but self-protection. The theory also points to Pikachu's immediate battle instincts. Even early on, Pikachu demonstrates unusually strong attacks and quick tactical awareness. While Pikachu does not always listen, when it does act, it acts decisively. This competence feels learned rather than instinctual. Ash, by contrast, is clearly inexperienced. He makes mistakes constantly. The power imbalance between trainer and Pokemon in those early episodes is unusual. Pikachu is often the more capable half of the partnership, a reversal of the expected dynamic. Another piece of circumstantial evidence lies in Pikachu's emotional intelligence. Pikachu reacts strongly to injustice, danger, and mistreatment of others. It forms bonds quickly once trust is established. These traits suggest emotional development that goes beyond a freshly caught Pokemon. Fans also pointed to the way Pikachu interacts with other Pokemon. It often takes on a leadership role, stepping in when others are threatened. This confidence, paired with skepticism toward humans, reinforced the idea that Pikachu had prior experience navigating trainer-Pokemon relationships. Professor Oak's behavior remains one of the strongest pillars of the theory. He does not attempt to train Pikachu himself. He does not recommend special handling beyond patience. He simply hands Pikachu over and observes. This distance feels intentional, as though Oak is allowing Pikachu to choose whether this new partnership will work. The theory gained further traction as the anime progressed and Pikachu continued to display power far beyond what its size and form would suggest. Even without evolving, Pikachu regularly stands against opponents that should overwhelm it. Fans argued that this strength came not just from innate potential, but from past training that never fully faded. For years, the anime neither confirmed nor denied this idea. Pikachu's backstory remained vague. There were no flashbacks, no explanations, no clear origin beyond Oak's lab. That silence allowed the theory to grow unchecked, passed along through forums, fan videos, and speculation. Then, much later, the franchise finally addressed Pikachu's past. In Pokémon Journeys, the episode Enter Pikachu reveals a definitive backstory. Before meeting Ash, Pikachu was a Pichu. It was not trained by a human. It was lonely, vulnerable, and raised by a kind Kangaskhan who treated it as her own. This upbringing explains Pikachu's emotional depth, its strength, and its attachment style. Under this canon explanation, Pikachu's distrust of Ash is not the result of a failed trainer relationship, but fear of abandonment. When Ash first reaches for Pikachu, Pikachu sees not a partner, but a threat to the fragile life it built with its surrogate family. This revelation officially disproves the theory, and yet the theory still matters. Before this episode aired, the theory filled a narrative gap that the series left open for over 2 decades. It gave meaning to unexplained details. It offered emotional coherence to Pikachu's behavior. It treated Pikachu not as a blank slate, but as a character with history. Even with the canonical explanation now in place, elements of the theory still resonate. Pikachu did have a life before Ash. It did experience loss. It did have to learn to trust again. The core emotional idea survives, even if the specifics change. Interestingly, the revelation reframes earlier evidence rather than invalidating it entirely. Pikachu's unusual Pokeball marking becomes symbolic rather than literal. Its power becomes the result of resilience rather than training. Oak's hesitation becomes caution, not secrecy. In some ways, the canon explanation makes the theory feel closer to the truth emotionally, if not structurally. What made the original theory compelling was never the idea of a mysterious former trainer. It was the idea that Pikachu was not starting from zero, that it carried emotional weight into its partnership with Ash. That idea remains intact. The theory also highlights a broader pattern in Pokemon storytelling. Early episodes often introduce mysteries without immediate payoff. These gaps invite interpretation, and fans naturally fill them with narratives that feel consistent with character behavior. In Pikachu's case, the absence of an origin story for so long allowed the character to feel deeper than its role as a mascot. It felt lived in, complicated, scarred in subtle ways. The theory also reflects how fans relate to Pikachu specifically. Pikachu is not just a Pokemon, it is the face of the franchise. Viewers project meaning onto it because it feels like a constant companion rather than a rotating cast member. Giving Pikachu a hidden past made it feel more real. Even after being disproven, the theory remains a snapshot of how fans engaged with Pokemon during its formative years. It represents a time when answers were scarce, speculation was communal, and mysteries felt intentional rather than delayed. It also demonstrates how much weight small details can carry. A single symbol on a Pokeball, a line of dialogue, a moment of hesitation. These fragments were enough to sustain a theory for decades. In the end, whether Pikachu had a trainer before Ash is less important than why the idea mattered. It mattered because it treated Pikachu as more than a mascot. It treated it as a character shaped by experience. And that, perhaps, is why the theory never fully disappears. Even with canon answers in place, fans still remember the feeling of wondering, the feeling that Pikachu's story began long before Ash ever put on his hat. And in a franchise built on journeys, that feeling makes all the difference. The very first episode of the Pokemon anime ends with an image that feels small in the moment, yet impossibly large in hindsight. Ash and Pikachu, exhausted and injured, lie on the ground after barely surviving an attack by a furious flock of Spearow. The danger has passed, but the silence that follows feels heavy. As they stare up at the sky, something crosses overhead. A massive bird with shimmering colors, wings cutting through the clouds like a living rainbow. Ash raises his Pokédex. It fails to identify what he is seeing. The bird disappears as quickly as it arrived, leaving behind no explanation, no dialogue, and no immediate consequence. The episode ends. The journey begins. For most viewers, especially at the time, this moment felt like a simple tease, a promise that the world was bigger than it appeared, a nod toward mystery, perhaps even a marketing hint at future games. But as the years passed, fans began to look back at that scene differently, not as a teaser, but as an origin point. What if that moment mattered far more than the anime ever acknowledged? Thus emerged one of the most enduring and far-reaching Pokemon theories, that Ash's first encounter with Ho-Oh was not random, symbolic, or purely aesthetic, but transformative. That Ho-Oh did something to Ash in that moment, not visibly, not immediately, but permanently. The theory exists in many forms, but they all revolve around the same idea. Ash was blessed. Ho-Oh is not portrayed as an ordinary, legendary Pokemon. Even within a world full of powerful beings, it occupies a strange, almost spiritual role. Its lore speaks of resurrection, renewal, and promises made to those who witness it. In Johto's mythology, seeing Ho-Oh is not just rare, it is meaningful. According to legend, those who see Ho-Oh are granted eternal happiness. This phrase alone has fueled countless interpretations, and when applied to Ash, it becomes deeply unsettling. Ash sees Ho-Oh at the very beginning of his journey, before he has earned badges, before he has proven himself, before he even understands the world he has stepped into. The encounter happens not after triumph, but after near failure. Ash and Pikachu survive something they arguably should not have. Some fans believe that survival is the first sign of the blessing taking effect. From that moment onward, Ash demonstrates an almost impossible resilience. He is struck by lightning repeatedly. He is blasted, burned, frozen, thrown, and crushed. He falls from great heights. He stands within explosions. He survives forces that routinely incapacitate others. In a world where Pokemon battles are dangerous enough that adults warn children repeatedly, Ash's physical durability borders on supernatural. The theory proposes that Ho-Oh, seeing Ash's bond with Pikachu in its earliest, rawest form, chose him, not as a champion, but as a bearer of its blessing. That blessing, depending on interpretation, manifests in one of several ways. The most popular version is eternal youth. Ash does not age. Years pass. Regions change. Companions come and go. Entire generations of trainers rise and fall. And yet, Ash remains 10 years old. His clothing changes. His experience grows. His emotional maturity fluctuates. But physically, he does not age. While this is often dismissed as a necessity of serialized storytelling, fans argue that the anime itself draws attention to time passing in other ways. Seasons change. Anniversaries are implied. Journeys last months or years. Ash's stagnation becomes more noticeable as the world moves around him. Under this theory, Ho-Oh's blessing froze Ash at the moment of pure potential. The moment when his journey was unburdened by regret, loss, or finality. Eternal happiness does not mean eternal victory. It means eternal pursuit. Ash is always chasing something. A league win, a stronger bond, a better understanding. He is never allowed to settle, because settling would end the journey. Ending the journey would end the happiness. Another version of the theory focuses not on age, but on invulnerability. Ash survives situations that should kill or permanently injure him. He is electrocuted by Pikachu's Thundershock countless times, often at point-blank range. He is struck by attacks far stronger than those intended for humans. If Ho-Oh granted Ash protection, this invulnerability makes sense. Ash is not immune to pain. He feels fear. He gets hurt, but he always recovers. There are no lasting injuries, no scars, no consequences that carry forward physically. This interpretation casts Ash as something closer to a mythic traveler than a normal human, a figure who moves through the Pokemon world untouched by its deadliest dangers, preserved so the journey can continue. A darker version of the theory merges these ideas and adds a cruel twist. What if Ho-Oh's blessing is not benevolent? In Johto legend, eternal happiness is not clearly defined. It does not say eternal success. It does not say eternal fulfillment. It simply says happiness. And happiness, especially when imposed, can be deeply subjective. Under this interpretation, Ash is trapped in a loop of perpetual striving. He comes close to winning Pokemon Leagues, only to fall short. He forms deep bonds, only to leave them behind. He grows, then resets. The journey continues, but the destination never arrives. Ash is always hopeful, always optimistic, always ready to try again. That optimism could be the blessing. Ho-Oh did not make Ash a champion. It made him content with trying. It removed the sting of failure by ensuring that failure never truly ends the journey. Ash is happy, not because he wins, but because he believes he will. Fans who favor this darker interpretation point to Ash's repeated near victories. He loses leagues by narrow margins. He is often defeated by unusual circumstances, technicalities, or sudden reversals. These losses feel narratively unsatisfying, but emotionally survivable. If Ash were to win definitively, the journey might end. If the journey ends, the happiness might fade. From this perspective, Ho-Oh's blessing becomes a curse wrapped in beauty. Ash is protected, preserved, and encouraged, but never allowed to reach final fulfillment. There is also the symbolism of Ho-Oh's timing to consider. The encounter happens after Ash and Pikachu's bond is solidified through shared danger. Pikachu chooses Ash. Ash risks himself for Pikachu. That mutual trust is witnessed by Ho-Oh. In many myths, blessings are granted not for skill, but for character. Ash's selflessness, clumsiness, and sincerity may have marked him as worthy of something greater, even if he never realizes it. The fact that Ash never recognizes Ho-Oh again, despite chasing legends across regions, adds to the mystery. He saw it once. That was enough. The blessing does not require repetition. Critics of the theory argue that the moment was never meant to carry this weight. It was a hook, a tease, a way to excite viewers and hint at a wider world. Ho-Oh was not even fully conceptualized at the time, and its later lore was retroactively applied. This is almost certainly true. But Pokémon has always allowed retroactive meaning to settle over early moments. Legends are rewritten, myths are expanded. Early ambiguity becomes fertile ground for interpretation. The theory also gained strength as Pokémon storytelling matured. Later generations introduced more explicit, supernatural mechanics. Time manipulation, reality distortion, wishes with unintended consequences. In that context, Ho-Oh's blessing feels less absurd and more plausible. Another layer of the theory ties back to Ash's emotional resilience. He experiences loss repeatedly. Pokémon leave, companions depart, victories slip away, and yet he recovers with remarkable speed. His grief is real, but brief. He always moves forward. This emotional durability could be seen as part of the blessing. Ash is never broken by failure. He is allowed to feel sadness, but not despair. Happiness, in this case, is not the absence of pain, but the absence of hopelessness. Under this interpretation, Ho-Oh's blessing is not flashy or dramatic. It is subtle. It shapes Ash's internal world rather than the external one. Even the fact that Ash's Pokédex cannot identify Ho-Oh is significant. The device fails. Knowledge fails. The moment exists outside the rules of the system. What happens there cannot be quantified or measured. That failure reinforces the idea that something metaphysical occurred, something that technology cannot track. The theory does not claim that Ash is aware of any of this. In fact, it depends on him being unaware. A conscious blessing would change his behavior. An unconscious one simply guides him. In this reading, Ash is not chosen to be special. He is chosen to continue. The world of Pokémon needs someone to walk its paths endlessly, to encounter dangers without dying, to challenge powerful beings without destroying balance, to keep moving. Ho-Oh, a symbol of renewal, may have ensured that Ash could fulfill that role indefinitely. Whether viewed as hopeful, tragic, or unsettling, the theory persists because it explains something the anime never fully addresses, why Ash's journey feels endless, and why that endlessness never truly breaks him. The rainbow bird appears once, silently, and vanishes. Everything else follows. And perhaps that is the nature of the blessing, not to change the world dramatically, but to set one person on a path that never truly ends. A journey without final victory, a happiness without conclusion. A boy who keeps walking, forever beneath a sky he once saw split by color. Among all the mysteries in the Pokemon anime, few are as quietly persistent as this one. Why does Giovanni keep Jesse and James around? From a purely in-universe perspective, the question is unavoidable. Team Rocket is not a joke organization. When the anime pulls back the curtain even slightly, it reveals a criminal syndicate with real resources, discipline, and competent agents. High-ranking operatives carry out large-scale missions, run profitable schemes, and operate with efficiency and discretion. In contrast, Jesse and James are loud, theatrical, impulsive, and catastrophically unsuccessful. They fail constantly. They draw attention everywhere they go. Their plans collapse in spectacular fashion, and yet they are never punished in any meaningful way. They are not demoted. They are not imprisoned. They are not expelled. They are reassigned over and over again. This contradiction sits at the heart of one of the darker Pokemon fan theories, that Jesse and James are related to Giovanni, and that their continued presence in Team Rocket is not the result of incompetence being tolerated, but family obligation being honored. The theory does not claim that Giovanni openly favors them. In fact, it argues the opposite. Giovanni keeps them at arm's length, assigns them to meaningless tasks, and ensures they remain far from Team Rocket's real operations. Not because they are useful, but because they are liabilities he does not want close to the core. Family, in this interpretation, is not protection, it is containment. To understand why fans gravitated toward this idea, it helps to examine Giovanni's portrayal. Giovanni is not emotional, he is not impulsive, he is methodical, pragmatic, and ruthless when necessary. He eliminates threats efficiently. He tolerates no weakness in positions of importance. And yet, Jesse and James persist. Even more telling is the contrast between them and other recurring Team Rocket agents. Cassidy and Butch, for example, are competent. They execute plans with minimal theatrics. They achieve results. When they fail, consequences follow. They are reprimanded, reassigned, or removed from the narrative entirely. Jesse and James, by comparison, fail loudly and often. Their schemes almost always involve elaborate disguises, dramatic monologues, and excessive risk. They leave trails. They expose Team Rocket's presence repeatedly. In any realistic criminal organization, this behavior would not be tolerated, unless there was a reason. The familial theory proposes several possibilities. Jessie could be related to Giovanni through her mother, Miyamoto, a known Team Rocket agent who disappeared under mysterious circumstances. Some interpretations suggest Miyamoto was a trusted operative, perhaps even close to Giovanni personally. If Jessie is her daughter, then Giovanni may feel responsible for her survival, even if he disapproves of her competence. James, on the other hand, comes from wealth. His family is rich, influential, and deeply unhappy. He fled that life to join Team Rocket, rejecting comfort in favor of belonging. Some fans speculate that Giovanni could be distantly related to James's family through corporate or criminal ties, making James's involvement less random than it appears. Under this theory, Jessie and James are not strangers who wandered into Team Rocket. They were always adjacent to it. Their joining was not an intrusion, but an inevitability. Giovanni's response, then, is damage control. Rather than placing them in positions where their failures could jeopardize real operations, he assigns them to a task that is technically important but practically endless: pursuing Ash and his Pikachu. This task keeps them constantly occupied, perpetually mobile, and far away from headquarters. It also keeps them chasing something that will never be captured. From Giovanni's perspective, this is the perfect solution. Jesse and James feel important. They believe they are on a critical mission. In reality, they are contained. This interpretation casts their endless pursuit of Pikachu in a new light. It is not a sign of obsession or incompetence. It is busy work, a loop designed to keep them from interfering with anything that matters. Their failures, in this context, are not punished because failure is expected. Success would actually be inconvenient. Another detail that supports the theory is how Giovanni interacts with Jesse and James when they do cross paths. He is distant, dismissive, but not furious. His reprimands lack the severity one would expect from a crime boss dealing with repeated failure. There is irritation, but no real threat. This emotional distance feels intentional. Giovanni does not yell, he does not threaten, he disengages. If Jesse and James were merely disposable grunts, he would remove them. If they were valued operatives, he would train or discipline them. Instead, he avoids them. Avoidance is often a sign of unresolved personal connection. The theory also explains why Jesse and James are allowed access to advanced technology despite their track record. They regularly deploy mechs, vehicles, and devices that suggest significant funding. This makes little sense for agents who accomplish nothing, unless the funding is not about results. Under the familial interpretation, the resources serve two purposes. First, they keep Jesse and James alive. Second, they ensure they remain distracted. Elaborate gadgets enable elaborate plans, which fail, which lead to dramatic escapes, which reset the cycle. It is an expensive solution, but Giovanni has resources to spare. There is also a psychological dimension to consider. Jesse and James desperately want approval. They crave recognition from Giovanni. They believe that capturing Pikachu will finally earn them respect. This belief keeps them loyal, motivated, and isolated from other influences. Giovanni never corrects this belief. He allows them to hope. This is perhaps the darkest aspect of the theory. Jesse and James are not just being protected, they are being manipulated emotionally. Their loyalty is maintained through false promise rather than trust. This reframes their flamboyance as coping rather than incompetence. Their humor, theatrics, and resilience become survival mechanisms. They fail, they are blasted away, and they return smiling because acknowledging the futility of their mission would be devastating. Family obligation, in this theory, is not kind, it is controlling. Critics of the theory point out that the anime frequently plays Jesse and James for comedy. Their survival is a gag. Their lack of consequences is a narrative necessity. Giovanni keeps them around because the show needs recurring antagonists, not because of hidden lore. This is almost certainly the real-world explanation. But Pokémon has a long history of allowing comedic elements to coexist with dark subtext. Many of its most disturbing ideas are buried beneath humor: the existence of criminal syndicates, the exploitation of Pokémon, the casual endangerment of children. The familial theory fits comfortably into this pattern. It does not contradict canon outright. It simply reframes motivation. Another interesting aspect of the theory is how it mirrors Jesse and James's own dynamic. They are fiercely loyal to each other, even when everything else fails. They function as a family unit within Team Rocket. They choose each other repeatedly, even when escape is possible. If Giovanni represents a distorted, distant family connection, then Jesse and James's bond becomes a response to that absence. They create their own support system because the one above them is cold and conditional. Their repeated failures, then, are not just failures of execution, they are failures of belonging. They are trying to prove their worth in a system that never intended to validate them. The theory also provides a reason why Jesse and James never truly defect. They complain, they doubt, they express frustration, but they never leave Team Rocket for good. Even when presented with alternatives, they return. If Team Rocket is the only place where their family connection exists, leaving would mean abandoning that last thread. Giovanni's silence in this reading is not indifference. It is distance, born of guilt, responsibility, or unresolved obligation. He keeps them alive, but not close. Useful, but not trusted. Present, but not important. This creates a tragic loop. Jesse and James chase approval they will never receive. Giovanni avoids confrontation he never wants to have. The result is endless failure without resolution. Whether or not the theory is true, it resonates because it explains something the anime otherwise leaves unexplained. Why incompetence is tolerated in a world that otherwise rewards efficiency. It also transforms Jesse and James from simple comic relief into tragic figures, not villains, but pawns, not rebels, but dependents trapped in a system that benefits from their dysfunction. They are not punished because punishment would require acknowledgement. They are not promoted because promotion would require trust. They exist in the space between. In the end, the theory does not need confirmation to feel meaningful. It adds emotional logic to an otherwise absurd dynamic. It explains why failure does not end their story. Because sometimes, the most damaging thing a powerful figure can do is not to cast someone out, but to keep them close enough to never escape and far enough to never matter. And Jesse and James, no matter how many times they fall, always come back.